Hello again, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather, this 13th day of December 2019. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. On hazardous weather graphics, there are no lit-up areas here. There are no watches, warnings, or advisories anywhere in the state here, probably through the weekend. And so it looks like a perfect weekend coming up, give or take here, although we have storm warnings coming into the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula and Southeast Bering Sea tonight, with a pretty good storm coming in with those. Otherwise, satellite imagery shows a weakening low pressure area here in the western Gulf of Alaska. They're near Kodiak Island, or just east of Kodiak. Brought about a third of an inch of rain to Kodiak during the day today, and gusty winds up along the North Gulf Coast as high as 55 miles an hour at a buoy here just southeast Cape St. Elias there, and winds gusting to 40 to 45 miles an hour out of the northwest and northeast at Barren Islands, and then over at Augustine Island in Kamishak Bay. But precipitation amounts across the southeast coast, with the exception of Ketchikan, picking up about an inch of precipitation today. Klawock had about a third of an inch. Otherwise, Sitka and near Cordova and Seward all picked up about, as well, and Seldovia all had about a quarter of an inch of precipitation. So nothing heavy at all with this band of moisture that's hung up along the North Gulf Coast and down into the Panhandle. Becoming a little more showery this afternoon over the southern southeast coast. And then got some gusty northwest winds, I mentioned, coming around this on the backside of this weakening system. A little bit of a breakthrough here over the Alaska Peninsula to about the Pribilofs. And then the next cloud mass here associated with a developing storm that's going to kind of be a couple of centers here, and then they'll merge up and swing up into the eastern Aleutians later tonight and for tomorrow, and then become kind of stationary in that location, slowly weaken through the weekend. Otherwise dry up to the north, all the way up to the Arctic coast, with pretty good flying conditions up there and light winds. And also you can see this was initially frontal boundary weakening here, and then a better development taking place here in the main low center back to the west there, that's pulling in the cold air from farther to the west and northwest. And on the chart today, there's roughly the position of this frontal boundary here, and 962 millibar low here, and then one just back to the west there. This one's going to kind of swing around, and this will slowly drift to the northeast, and they'll both combine, and that'll get a little bit better organized low pressure area, bringing the storm force winds into the eastern Aleutians and southeast Bering Sea later tonight and especially tomorrow. Otherwise, we've got the slow-moving system here in the Gulf of Alaska, band of moisture up along the coast and trailing down into the Panhandle. It looks like some clearing showing up right off the southeast coast there from, well, especially off the Prince of Wales Island coast, looking at this imagery. And then a little bit of a break here, pretty narrow between this system and the next one coming in, and then very weak trough up here, keeping some scattered snow showers, kind of a line of them here, roughly from St. Lawrence Island down along the southwest coast to the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, the interior pretty dry and precipitation free, other than maybe a few scattered flurries in whatever cloudiness is up in this area, as well as a few isolated snow showers along the Alaska Range. And those are pretty light. Looking at the forecast for tonight, you'll see this system does intensify, and it gets a tighter pressure field associated with it, and the lines are close enough together for storm force winds, sustained 50-knot winds here for the coming into the eastern Aleutians, up into the southeast Bering Sea and the Alaska Peninsula. Cold Bay could see gusts later tonight or tomorrow, possibly over 60 miles an hour out of the east-southeast. Otherwise, this trough keeps a chance of light snow in, or keeps areas of light snow in with mostly cloudy skies from, actually looks like near Dillingham, Togiak Bay, especially the southwest mountains, and then on up to the western Seward Peninsula. Some of that might catch the Nome area, and also, of course, Wales, Tin City, and still a chance of snow showers, St. Lawrence Island. Wind's not too bad there. This low really weak here just to your west, linking up with Arctic low farther to the north, but high pressure pretty strong and more or less holding here over the eastern interior areas, the northeast interior, keeping it kind of cool, but definitely dry with light winds. And that's sort of trying to dry it out over the panhandle as well. Just looking for some scattered showers of rain or snow. Tonight, it stays kind of damp for the North Gulf Coast, but these are pretty light amounts. And then for tomorrow, that southeast flow with the ridge right here along and just to the east of the panhandle, that keeps surges of moisture coming up to the, well, possibly Yakutat over to Cordova, but especially western Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, and then that links up with this front as it pushes Kodiak Island for gale force winds and rain, possibly moderate, maybe heavy at times here just in advance of that front, spilling into the Bristol Bay area, and mixed precipitation here. Actually, I could have had a little bit bigger pink area there, but it'll be either in the form of rain or snow. Slight chance of freezing rain, but it doesn't look like quite the pattern for that. And isolated snow showers over the northern Bering Sea. No change over the central northern interior. And light winds, dry conditions, basically under the influence of high pressure. Trough farther out to the west with a little more numerous rain and snow showers. Outlook for second day of the weekend, Sunday, stronger storm shows up out there over the horizon, just coming onto the edge of the map there with the another round of gale force, possibly storm force winds, but gales look more likely with rainfall with that coming in toward the Shemya-Attu area. High pressure building over the eastern or the central Aleutian, so it looks like a really nice day coming up for Adak and Atka on Sunday with partly mostly sunny skies, light winds. Snow showers, cold air coming south-southeast here across the eastern Bering Sea from the Bering Strait. So snow showers, probably snowfall levels will drop to near sea level for the Fox Islands. Mixture of rain or snow again with this slowly moving storm that actually finally kicks off to the east a little bit after hanging up near the eastern Aleutian. So that's going to keep it wet and windy for Kodiak Island, and back in the increase in the winds, probably gale force winds here for the North Gulf Coast, Barren Islands, and light snow or rain showers, nothing heavy for the North Gulf Coast, and high pressure trying to keep this front off to the west. And for the lows tonight for the southeast coast, not too bad, near 30, 35 about sums it up, 10 to 20 below northeast interior, lower 30s south central Alaska, and 5 below to 5 above for the Arctic coast. And highs tomorrow, looking at the lower to mid 40s here, Alaska Peninsula from the eastern Aleutians, all the way up into northeast Bristol Bay there, King Salmon, lower 40s. 30, 36 for south central Alaska. Definitely cooler up to the north, staying below zero at Fort Yukon and Arctic Village, and 35 to 42 for the Panhandle. And then your lows, mid 30s there for the Aleutians. And again, 10 to 15 below zero here from the actually Northway Toke area right on up into the Yukon Flats. Single numbers Arctic coast, still mild here, Bristol Bay, lows in the lower 30s. Now be followed by highs for the Panhandle, looks like mostly in the 30s, and 35 to 45 for the southern interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic for Saturday morning. We've got some IFR here, central Aleutians, across the southern southeast Bering, really just a band across the Alaska Peninsula, and a narrow band of VFR up here to the northeast. IFR over the southwest mountains, some IFR Prince William Sound there, and over to about Cape Yakataga and the south side of the Kenai Peninsula. Marginal to VFR areas south of the Alaska Range here, with marginal VFR across the Kuskokwim and lower Yukon River Valley areas. VFR, central interior on up to the Arctic coast, although looks like some IFR at least starting out there for the central Arctic coast. And the southeast coast, mostly marginal. Afternoon, Saturday, some IFR here, north coast of the Panhandle. Otherwise, that looks like VFR, central and southern areas, the Dixon entrance, marginal for the North Gulf Coast, IFR, Prince William Sound, on down the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Kamishak Bay, not quite in the southern Cook Inlet, but the marginal VFR looks like it's up to about the Forelands in Cook Inlet, with VFR on up into the Sitnamanuska Valley, marginal farther up toward the Brooks Range, or toward the Alaska Range, north of the Alaska Range, pretty good with VFR. And then for the Arctic coast, the IFR tomorrow afternoon will hold through Sunday morning there for the central and east side. Otherwise, VFR for the north slope. A zone of marginal VFR, south side of the Brooks Range there. Really, it looks like the northern Koyukuk and Yukon Valley areas there, Porcupine River, and VFR, Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, Copper River Basin. Western Copper River Basin of Prince William Sound looks kind of marginal up across the Talkeetnas to just south of, say, Windy Pass, and then down along and east of the Western Alaska Range, but pretty good IFR zone here from St. Lawrence Island down across Nunivak Island, Yukon Delta coast, right across the Aleutian Range, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. Another band here from roughly the Pribilofs there, on down to the Fox Islands, and VFR for the southeast coast, VFR for the western central Aleutians as well. And then for the Sunday afternoon forecast, we've got marginal VFR now for the western central Aleutians. IFR looks like definitely Unimak Island, and to a lesser extent Unalaska Island, and then some IFR, more of a solid zone there. Again, hugging the coastline, on up to the Bering Strait, right over St. Lawrence Island, eastward across Kodiak, southwest mountains here, Kilburg, Auckland Mountains, kind of IFR sort of afternoon coming up there, but good VFR in the central interior. Still a band of areas of marginal VFR along and south of the Brooks Range there, mostly affecting the Koyukuk, Upper Yukon valleys. North Slope there on Arctic coast, VFR for the afternoon. Same thing for the eastern interior here, down to the eastern Copper River Basin, Wrangell Mountains. And still VFR for the southeast coast, so a pretty good VFR day coming up for the Panhandle for Sunday. And for Anaktuvik, for passes, Anaktuvik VFR. Adigan looks good as well, VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill look mostly marginal, occasionally marginal for rainy, windy VFR. Isabel, marginal at times, and for Mentasta, go with VFR there. Tanita, marginal VFR to start, VFR late morning through the afternoon. Portage, marginal VFR with IFR on the eastern approach. And for Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels here, cooling off up over the northern interior from the 6,000-foot freezing level we had today up in that area, 2,000 tomorrow, and 2,000 here, eastern Gulf of Alaska, right off the southeast coast, under with the ridging over the area there, and then the southerly flow, that storm pulling some warmer air up, but not too warm, 2,000 feet to the Alaska Peninsula. And for icing, areas of light to isolated moderate rime icing here for the Alaska Peninsula, above about 3,000 feet here at Fox Islands, Pribilofs, and above about 5,000 for the North Gulf Coast. Heaviest, best chance of seeing some considerable moderate due to terrain enhancement here along the Aleutian Range and Kodiak Island. And for the jet stream, a trough here from the Arctic there down across the Bering Sea and Aleutians. High pressure ridging from the Panhandle right on up into the Arctic. So we've got southerly flow 40 to 60 knots over the western interior. Real cold air here dropping down into Canada and on down into the northern lower 48. Southerly flow, this storm pulling northwestward tomorrow, kind of looks like a week ago. 40 to 60 knot winds with that, up to 40 knots coming onto the Kenai Peninsula, and about the same at 3,000 feet. Turbulence, widespread moderate chop, southwest southern Alaska, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and to a lesser extent up the west coast.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. GOLD connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the The salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis, really not too much different from what we had yesterday. Some concentration of ice varying here from the Bering Strait, of course, up into the Chukchi Sea. And still have this open area, though, southeast of Wrangel Island. Otherwise, a little bit of expansion, it looks like, here along the Yukon Delta, possibly. Really hard to tell on this scale. And really through the for the 5-day period, continuing to fill in up through here and thicken a little bit with less change down to the south. And for the coastal water forecast there along the southeast coast, there on the south coast, southeast winds 10 to 15 knots, north coast, southeast 15 knots, seas 10 to 11 feet, and light southeast winds at 10 knots for the central and southern inside waters here, while Lynn Canal north at 15. And the outlook for Sunday, no change there for Lynn Canal, northerlies at 15 knots, and a tad stronger here for Stevens Passage with gale force gusts to 35 knots out of the southeast, otherwise sustained 20-knot winds, and east 20 for Stevens Passage, seas at about 4 feet. And we've got mostly gales along the coast, southeast 35 knots, central and north coast, seas up to 15 feet, and along Prince of Wales Island coastline there in that marine area, southeast at about 30 with 12-foot seas. And for Prince William Sound, tomorrow, southeasterlies, 25 knots, seas 6 feet. Same forecast here for the eastern North Gulf Coast, but the seas a little higher at 11 feet. East 30 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, and gales for the Barren Islands, 35 knots out of the east, and full gales for the Kamishak Bay area, east at 40. Southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, east winds 25 knots, light northeast winds at 15 north of the Forelands. Big increase, double that number here for northern Cook Inlet and Sunday. Northeast 30 knots, seas 6 feet. Gale warning, southern Cook Inlet 12-foot seas, and storm warnings. Kamishak Bay east 50 knots, east 50 knots for the Barren Islands. Almost a storm for the western North Gulf Coast. Easterly sustained at 45 knots, seas 23 feet. 40-knot winds for the eastern North Gulf Coast, and 30-knot easterlies for Prince William Sound, seas at 7 feet. Kodiak Island tomorrow on the east side, southeast 40 knots, and that southeasterly wind at 40, that 40-knot wind extends all the way to Cape Sarachev. North side, top side, or the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, southeast 50 knots. Good for a storm warning, seas 10 feet, and a full gale for Bristol Bay out of the east. And then that comes down to about 30 knots for Bristol Bay on Sunday for small craft advisories. Much lighter here, and northeast in direction on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Small craft advisory southerlies 25 knots there from Cape Sarachev to Castle Cape with 20-foot seas, and then here up towards Sitkinak, Akiak, southern Kodiak Island, the Trinity Islands, southeast 25 knots, and east-southeast 40 knots. A couple of windy days coming up for the Kodiak Island marine areas. And for the Fox Islands, storm warnings, varying directions. Head of the front, south to southeast at 50 knots. Behind the front, northwest at 45 to 50 knots. Northwest 45 knots, Adak and Atka, seas 20 to 22 feet. And then slowly diminishing down to 25 knots there from Kiska to Shemya. Outlook for Sunday, next storm affecting the far western Aleutians, so probably west of Kiska, more likely Shemya and Attu coming up to 40 knots out of the southeast, otherwise west 25. Gales continue here, especially for Atka, and may lose them in the afternoon for Adak, but anyway, west-northwest 40 knots. And for the Fox Islands, gales and storm warnings, with the storm warnings on the Pacific side of the islands and the gales on the north side, 35 to 40 knots, otherwise northwest 50 knots, seas approaching or just under 30 feet. And for the southwest coast, east 40 south of Nunivak Island, northeast 45 for the Pribilofs, 15-foot seas there. Small craft advisories here for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Matthew Island, and east-southeast 15 to 20, Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. East 15 to 20 knot winds, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island on Sunday, with small craft advisories along the southwest coast out of the east-northeast, northwest 25 for the Pribilofs. Beaufort Sea, east 10 or 10 to 15 knots, and then 20 knot winds from Cape Beaufort to Wales tomorrow. Sunday, not too bad, 15 to 20 knot winds, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, otherwise everywhere else east 15, except here from Cape Thompson to Wales, east 20 knots. For tonight, stays kind of damp along the North Gulf Coast, but nothing significant. Tapering off for the Panhandle. Storm force winds and moderate rain come in with this next system, becomes stationary tomorrow, and then pulls off to the northeast toward Kodiak on Sunday. That's all I've got time for today. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.